Have you ever worked with a client who just seems so resistant? Whatever it is that you ask, they don't know. Maybe they just clam up. Maybe they just stay at a very superficial top level of conversation. So let's talk about what's really going on here today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge a number that just blows my mind. 33% of you are subscribed to the channel, and for that, I am eternally grateful. But that means that 67% of you who are watching this content are not yet subscribed to this channel, and I would like to change that number. So I have a request for you. Please subscribe. It is a free, easy way for you to help to support the channel and this work. What I promise is that I will continue to provide you with content that is meaningful, rich, and useful to you. So in advance, I thank you. And on that note, let's get into it. What is resistance? Because I hear this from coaches and therapists alike. This client is so resistant. This thinker just doesn't want to play. They only want to stay at the surface level, or they don't say anything hardly at all. Resistance is a defense mechanism. It is not something people are consciously doing just to drive you nuts, which it may feel like. It is something that people are doing because they do not yet feel safe enough to have the deeper conversation. And I want to be clear, this may not have anything to do with you personally. They may feel safe with you as a person, but it may be that they do not feel safe to open this window of Pandora's box and let all of this stuff out into the space, which they may not be able to tuck all back in a 30 to 50-minute conversation. What often happens is resistance is not the enemy. It is actually information. It's telling you something. People tend to go into what looks like resistance when they're going into their sympathetic nervous state of fight, flight, freeze, or freak out. They are rarely doing this just to be difficult people. They are just really trying to survive. And so I'd like to bring a little compassion to both you and the person that you're working with. It may be that there is a perception of threat. Again, that's sort of the window of tolerance on being able to be in a state of discomfort. But also, it could be, I don't know you well enough to share this really important information. I think it was Brene Brown who said, not everyone has earned the right to hear your story. And I think sometimes people come into coaching and therapy and they're like, well, I don't know. Have you really earned the right to hear my story? And the answer may be for them, not yet. And so that means that as the coach or therapist who might be working with somebody who resistance and the kind of like the pushback comes in, it's an opportunity for us to make sure that we're developing a rich enough and deep enough and safe enough relationship for that person to feel safe enough to then open up a little bit. Common causes of resistance often have to do with things that are like unresolved trauma. So for a coach, depending on the circumstance and depending on the person, this may be a situation in which you really need to have an alignment with a therapist where they can do the deeper work of trauma and really recovery from trauma and growing through the trauma and really shifting and learning the resources that they need. I think it's one of the important elements of trauma-informed coaching, which is everybody's got trauma. The degrees of trauma are different for different people. So one person may be way up here and another person may have trauma way down here. We often talk about it as big T and little t traumas, but it is really, there may be something unresolved that is getting triggered when we begin to talk about something like confidence or having a difficult conversation. If I grew up in a family where every complicated conversation that I ever had turned into a giant freaking shit show, excuse my language, then the likelihood of me wanting to have that big, difficult conversation with either my boss or my direct report or my spouse or my kids may be really limited. And so it could be an issue of I need to get past the fact I'm no longer five, which a therapist could really help with, and be able then to move into the place of what are the skills I need to begin to develop so that I can see a different way of being in relationship to a difficult conversation, which is where coaching can be so useful. I think that oftentimes there are certain people, I think I'm one of them, where I tend to meet people and I'm like very open and comfortable with new people. I generally don't have a problem with it. I'm not unique, nor am I the only way that people show up in conversations. There are a lot of people who show up in conversations with more of an attitude of, until I know you, I don't trust you. And I tend to give trust pretty freely. Other people don't. They have good reasons to not do that. And so some of it may be the relationship just has insufficient trust built into it at this point. Again, I'm going to go back to that overwhelm. If I open this box, it's Pandora's box, who knows what kind of things are going to just like escape into the world that I will have no control over and maybe too overwhelming. I think the last thing I really want to talk about that shows up is also we have been talking and hearing a lot about resilience. Honestly, there are a lot of people who don't have that sense of agency and efficacy. And this becomes really important in how we are either leading people into trauma or allowing them to lead us. And I have seen coaches and I have seen therapists drag people below the waterline before they were ready. And that is not how we create mermaids who are willing to dive deeply below the surface. So this idea that the person comes in and they seem resistant may just be, I'm not ready because I don't feel strong enough yet to be able to go into that Pandora's box and even explore it, or with you. So I think we have to kind of take that into consideration. How it shows up often is the sessions are incredibly silent. Maybe there's real surface level, superficial conversations. Everything's very tactical. I just really want steps. I want a checkbox. There may be the telling of the same story over and over and over again. And this looping really is something that happens when we don't feel like we've been heard really yet, and we haven't yet acknowledged something for ourselves. So it becomes a really important place when we notice the looping that is a provider, we may be providing a perspective. May I share an observation? I'm noticing a looping around this story that we're coming back to it multiple different times. What about this is so important for you to acknowledge so that you can move through it? And in this way, what we're doing is the invitation is not to continue the story, but to start to look at what needs to happen in order to continue to move and progress through the story. It will also often, this resistance will show up as defensiveness. And the way that I've also seen it is people who come into coaching specifically, and this happened in therapy also, but I'm going to use it in the frame of reference of coaching, where they've been invited because they're in a leadership program, or they've been invited because they're having problems with their teams, or they've been invited to coaching because they've made a mistake and they're in trouble. Under some of these different conditions, you would think, like, if I've been invited to a leadership program, yay, I'm so excited to do coaching. But that isn't always the case. People are super busy. Their numbers don't change. They don't always have air cover from their organization to do the coaching. So they're constantly being drawn away from their appointments. They're having to cancel. And several people I've worked with through the years have come into coaching through very much that particular avenue of, we really want you to be in a position of leadership, so we're offering you this leadership coaching, only to come into the coaching and be like, I already know that, I do that, I've done that, been there, I have it, I got it, yeah, that's great. And they're not really interested in the coaching. Maybe it's because they don't really understand what the coaching can offer them, or it is because they're the kind of person who really doesn't want to have that information coming in from a stranger. Maybe they'll read books, maybe they'll do other things, but again, there are different personalities in the world, and some people, they just don't want it to have the coaching or the therapy. I've had both. And at that point, you as the provider, the coach, or the therapist, you're at a decision point about how you want to continue to work with the person. Sometimes there's ways of going, well, how do we make this useful then for you so that we can both, enjoy the conversation? What is it? And we really work to try and find what it is that's important to them. Or maybe we go, I want to set you free. And we have a conversation with the organization that we're working with and say, there isn't enough buy-in to have this be productive. And that becomes a very different cause of it. Excuse the quick interruption. I would like to take a moment to make sure you know that you are invited to my monthly Q&A for coaches. It's my treat. Follow the QR code right here and go sign up. I'd love to see you. It's the third Monday of every month, and you are invited. When the person comes and they're an open human being who gives trust like me, where I become resistant, and so I'm going to just sort of make a globalization over open people who become resistant in the process of the work they're doing with coaches and therapists, is when I feel like I'm being pushed too hard, or when I'm being told what to do. I will tell you, I am a redheaded Irish Leo. I do not like being told what to do by other people. And even if you're right, which often you probably are, and I'll give you that, I still would prefer to come up with it myself. So it is this kind of sense of like, if I'm being told what to do, or if the person is keeping me trying to problem solve versus really figure myself out, I'm going to find myself being very shut down and resistant to the conversation. So again, the coach or therapist is over functioning. There is over advice, over solutions. And I don't know about you, but I've had a few times where I'm doing this and it's like, well, what about this? What about that? What about the other thing? And we start naming all these different things that maybe that would work for the person. And what we get is, what about this? No, tried that. What about that other thing? No, I don't think I could do that. What about this other thing? No, I don't like that one. That one wouldn't work for me at all. And so what ends up happening is you find yourself, I'm going to do a little jig dance, and hopefully we can figure out what you need. And the coach or therapist is just working way too hard. So if you've ever found yourself working way too hard, it's because you've butted up against some resistance, and the resistance is probably to all your song and dance of trying to solve the problem for somebody. I also think that it can be goal misalignment. So for instance, if the goal is something the person really isn't invested in, they don't really care all that much. So how do we get really strong agreements and really strong goal setting? I talk about the embodied grounded goals, or eggs, that I work with a lot of my clients, so that what we have is an overarching goal for the work that we're doing that is big enough for the work that we're going to be doing. And what I find is all the little daily weird things that happen that people bring into coaching then, or they want to think through in coaching, or how they're making decisions, all fall under the umbrella of that larger goal of who they want to be in the world. We have another video on how the embodied grounded goal, and you can see a link to it at the end of this video. I think the last thing that I'm really going to kind of point to is that this idea of directionality, which I talk about, and I've written several articles on also, but this idea of directionality. If what we do in a coaching conversation is get a very superficial agreement, like, what would you like to talk about today? Well, I'd really like to talk about this difficult conversation I'm about to have with my direct report. Great. And what would be a success measure of that? That I have the conversation with my direct report. Excellent. Well, what do you need to talk about so that we can help you get to having a conversation with your direct report? It's so superficial that what ends up happening is we don't have a full enough agreement. And the outcome being, I have a conversation with my direct report isn't enough. So this is where deeper agreement setting really becomes important. So what would you like to talk about today? I'm going to have a difficult conversation with my direct report. What's really drawing that to the surface for you today? Well, I'm feeling really kind of anxious about it. This is a person who I sometimes struggle with, and they don't take feedback very well. What is your goal for that conversation? Well, I want them to know I'm on their side. I want them to know that I've got their back, but I also need them to do their job. And so, I need to have that conversation that there are things they are not doing that I need them to do, and I want them to be successful. So, what is different when you show up like that in a conversation? Well, I'm confident and I've got clarity that my goal is that I want them to know I want them to be successful and I'm on their side. So then is that what would be important for us to explore today? Is this movement from this sort of, you know, worry about having this conversation towards showing up confidently and having them know you're really on their side? Yeah. How would you know that we had made it? Well, I'd feel more confident. I'd have some ease about this conversation that's coming up. Excellent. So then where would you like to begin the exploration between where you are now and finding that ease and confidence so that you can have this conversation? At this point now we have directionality. We know where we're heading. And this is where we also allow the client to lead us. There's a lot less resistance when they're telling us where they want to explore, because now they're going to bring up whatever it is they're going to bring up. Like, I've always struggled with having difficult conversations, or I'm really worried. This is the pushback person. They push back on everything. I mean, whatever that is going to show up for them, it's going to show up here, and they're going to tell us, so we're not telling them what they need to be exploring. So I'm going to stop here and just let you sit with some of these ideas. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And so please feel free to leave comments below. What sort of resistance have you seen? And how have you worked with it that really seemed to support the thinker/client to move forward and engage with you? I would love to hear what you have to say. Until next time, happy coaching.